So my name is Uche Amaechi. I am a lecturer in education here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So I want to welcome all of you to today's conversation, which is on media literacy and artificial intelligence, something that I know is probably on most of your minds. And if not, it's something that definitely probably impacts most of your work. So we're glad that you're here. And if you want to submit questions, like I mentioned, as people are coming in, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to submit questions there. We'll try to answer if we can in the conversation. If not, we'll try to follow up. Also, when you're at the bottom of your screen, you will see a way to access captions if you do need those. So yeah, welcome and let's get started. So I want to jump in and welcome our guests. So we have 3 guests for today. First, we've got Merve Lapus. Merve is the Vice President of Education Outreach and Engagement at the nonprofit Common Sense Education. Hi, Merve. Want to wave? Say
How's
hi
it
to the
going?
audience.
Great to see you, Uche. Great to be with everyone today.
Great. And then next, we've got Sarah Newman, who goes by Newman. Newman is the Director of Art and Education at Harvard's metaLAB, which is part of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. Hi, Newman.
Hi.
Excellent. And last but not least, we've got Faith Rogow. Faith is a longtime media literacy education leader. Faith is also an author. Her most recent book is Media Literacy for Young Children, Teaching Beyond Screen Time Debates. So thank all 3 of you for being willing to jump into this conversation. So I'm going to start out asking each of you maybe one question. Since we have about 30 minutes, we're going to try to keep the questions and the responses short in the beginning, and maybe we can pull some other folks in. So first, I want to come to you, Newman. You've researched AI, artificial intelligence. What should educators be most aware of when it comes to artificial intelligence and common literacy issues?
Great. Hi, everybody. So happy to be here. I lead something called the AI Pedagogy Project, which we can put into the chat. And it's basically resources for educators to equip them for this moment. So I won't share too much right now. I encourage you to go there. But I would say a really important thing is the fact that educators from all different fields are capable of becoming knowledgeable and having sufficient command of the subject matter to engage productively and critically with their students on these topics. In my view, you do not need to have a background in computer science at this stage to be able to engage with, think about, and teach with artificial intelligence. In fact, it's really useful to have people from wide-ranging backgrounds. It's actually essential that we have people from wide-ranging backgrounds in this conversation. The other thing I'll mention quickly is that this literacy can be a lever. I mean, there's different levers in society that we have access to. Regulation and policy are one. We'll probably talk more about that. At least in the US, that tends to be on the slower side. And as we've seen with social media, even when there are policies, they're not always effective. And a really good sort of additional lever that we have access to is learning about how the technologies work, learning what the risks are, learning how students and others can use these tools responsibly while preserving things like privacy. And I think it's really important and actually essential that all educators be engaging with this right now.
Thank you so much, Newman. Merve, Faith, anything you'd like to add kind of as a general, what should educators be aware of or thinking about?
Faith, I'd toss it to you first, please.
I would say probably from my perspective, the most important thing is that educators and students remember that AI is a media technology. And so everything that we in inquiry-based media literacy education have been applying so far, we can apply and should apply to AI.
Yeah, I mean, I love both what and it's shared. I think it's also just an incredibly important reminder that AI technology in general, there's a human-centered purpose for why we might want to use it, how it might be helpful to us. And then once something is produced or whatever it creates from it, we still make a decision around what we want to do with it, whether we want to share it, use it, iterate from it. So it's incredibly important to, you don't, like Newman mentioned, we don't have to be, all CS educators or understand everything about computer science and use these tools, but it is important to understand the human connection behind the way that we are using these tools so that we can be critical about the way that we use it. We don't have to just be cynical users of the tech and say, oh, it's all fake, or it's, potentially someone's trying to ruse us up. But if we can really think critically about it, it impacts the way we receive it, and also impacts the way that we use it for ourselves.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thanks for leading us with that response, Newman, because I was going to ask a follow-up question about, there is a sense that people feel overwhelmed when it comes to AI, but some of what we've heard is like, it is a media literacy. We do have some basic approaches. And if we take an inquiry mindset to trying to learn and humanizing it, it is something that there's an entry point for almost everybody into it. So thank you so much. I want to, something that you mentioned, Newman, about kind of foreshadowing, there are regulations and policies that try to address AI and media literacy in general. So I know, Merve, that you focus, your nonprofit actually focuses on curriculum. And part of that is that I think it's in, where is it, in California? Like, it's one of many states that actually are coming up with requirements at the state level for media literacy in the classroom. So your nonprofit kind of responds to that. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on either legislation or having regulation around this, and how organizations can respond?
Sure. I mean, I think so. I mean, as a nonprofit, and especially around the policy work, the organization is really focused on being kid partisan. So what's right for our kids, and the way that these tools are amazing opportunities, but then also potentially have some issues or things that need to be addressed, and like what type of political guidelines should we have in place. And so in many ways, there's still a lot of work to be done here in the US as compared to what's happening in Europe and others, where we're setting some really strict regulation around the way that we're develop these tools to be truly safe for kids in that experience, and how they use it. But until that point, it is incredibly important that we really empower our kids to think critically about the way that we use media and technology, the way that informs our lives, as well as in our instruction. And so having things in place that really allow for educators to make a priority with, tech in the classroom isn't just something that happens nowadays and just, happenstance per grade room. It's not something where there's just 3 computers in the back of the class like I had growing up. In many cases, we're in one-to-one schools and classrooms, and that's even minimum. And so with that, with so much technology being kind of at the center of instruction and learning, and how we feed ourselves in many ways too, just with delivery and all that, it's incredibly important that we empower our kids to think critically and behave safely and participate responsibly with media and tech, and providing those guidelines and frameworks so that in schools, we have some policies and things in place so that we know these will help our kids be stronger constituents, stronger conveyors of this work, and effective participants in the jobs of the future, and as well as just community people today. So having these guidelines are incredibly important ways to kind of set some lines in the sand where we're not too sure in many cases, what do we do here? Where do we stand? How do we set some of these things forward?
Thank you so much.
Can I pile on briefly to that? Yes. So just to say, I feel like for educators, and I know we have many educators here, maybe mostly educators, it is really overwhelming to know where to start. And I think Uche touched on this, and Merve did too. I think one reason it's extra overwhelming is because there's so much hype on the internet, and there's so many people that are talking in ways that are fairly alarmist. And so a couple of points I just want to make on this to sort of really make this concrete is, number one, experts don't agree. AI experts do not agree about the current risks, the futures we're expecting. There's a lot of disagreement, which is interesting, but it also means we need to hold all of our opinions lightly and be comfortable researching more and seeing conflicting opinions, and not to give it too much power. Even if you read something that sounds really alarmist, that doesn't mean it's true. And the language we use to talk about these technologies is a way that often people are giving them too much power, personifying them, saying the large language model thinks this, or it wants to do this. They don't think, they don't want, they're not living entities. We're not close to that. And so I think we need to be really mindful of our language. And there's a lot of great educators that are writing about this. The last thing I'll say, just to make this Merve's point concrete in terms of where to start, is you could probably spend 1 hour reading good content, maybe have a book club with your friends to discuss it, maybe join one of the online reading groups on the AI pedagogy resource page, which we can also put into the chat. There's some really great online groups talking about AI in education. So if you have a community with which you can sort of vet content, discuss it, you could honestly spend an hour in level up significantly if you're reading good stuff. Thanks.
Yeah, and
Excellent.
I would
Thank you,
follow
Faith.
up on getting concrete with it to say, in some ways this feels very new, and a lot of what it's about isn't all that new. That it's not like before, and I would say when I encounter educators, when they say AI, what they really mean is generative AI. They're really talking about either writing essays, maybe constructing a lesson plan for themselves, and or art of some sort. So that's really because AI as a whole is much bigger than that. But that's really, I think, what most educators are dealing with. And it's not like the kinds of things that kids are now encountering, like, oh, it's really hard to tell the fake from the real now. Well, from a media literacy education perspective, even 5 years ago, before anybody had heard of ChatGPT, we were certainly helping kids understand, well, you're going to see stuff scrolling by on your social media feed, and some of it's going to be true and some of it's not. And you have to make that assumption and then learn to use inquiry-based critical thinking questions to probe and to say, do I think this is true? Why? Are there sources? We teach lateral reading, all of those kinds of things. And the other side of it is, from a production side, for those who are using generative AI to create things, that media literacy has always taken those same reflective questions and said, okay, think about what you're producing. And when you produce stuff online, you are a media creator. That brings with it certain responsibilities and ethics. And so we ask those questions. And from a media literacy education perspective, we want to make sure that instead of just teachers asking the questions, that they're teaching students to ask the questions. That if teachers are the only ones asking the questions, then it's the teachers who are doing all the learning work. And we want the students to do the learning work. So we have to teach students to ask these questions.
And something that Faith said is actually incredibly important about where we're at now is, historically, it's been folks like Faith and others who have been focusing on media literacy, or our librarians or our tech leads, that primarily were doing this kind of instruction. But now, because we're using tech in every class and in many ways are using the new generative AI tools and other resources, it's incumbent on all of us to have a general idea of what that means then in the discussion with our kids or with the folks that we're supporting. So it's not just that silo or that group of individuals who's historically done the instruction. It's up to all of us to reinforce these conversations in practice, because it's a part of all of our classrooms, especially for the K-12 educators here. But in general, we all use tech in some shape or form. It's incumbent on us to better understand what that means and how we're role modeling that to our kids or to our students.
Yeah, there's not a PD that I give now where I don't say, this is the job of everyone in the building.
I think that's a really fabulous point, Merve. And you just underscored it, that it reminds me of that saying, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. And there have been some people who have had to focus on media literacy, whether because that was their domain or they were thinking maybe a little bit ahead. And now that it's something that's in the water that we swim in, it's just there. It's all of a sudden incumbent on everybody. And perhaps in saying that we have these mechanisms that some people have been creating over time that may still have some applicability. So that may help people step back and maybe not be as overwhelmed. I think that's kind of a theme that I'm picking up from this conversation. Is that accurate, or is there something that I'm?
Yeah, I mean, I see Newman also like ready to chime in on something. I think some of the things that we also kind of almost not skipped, but just kind of gave some insights to also is, in many ways, we're already addressing these things. If you're an educator who's in charge of the policy around how to address these types of issues, if you're already addressing academic integrity, privacy, the way that social media can be used effectively or not, these generative versions of AI into that, you've already done most of the work. Now it's applying it to the new ways that these tools are able to present new information and the speed in which they can do it. So you've done a lot of this pre-work. It's about seeing how it applies to kind of the newest innovation side of it. It's not something new, but it is an iteration to things we're already addressing. So if you have those things in place, you're actually many steps in the direction that you hope to be. But Newman, let's send it over to you. I see something bubbling in there.
No, I'm so enthusiastic about these points, and I wanted to underscore a couple of things that Faith said, because, and well, actually everybody said, because they're so important. And one of them is the historical context, and seeing these emerging technologies as new and scary and different as they feel historically, and part of the historical trend. As Faith mentioned, a lot of times when educators or others are talking about AI, they're really talking about generative AI. There's a lot of uses of other forms of AI in our lives that we're not curious about, we're not questioning, we're not scared of. And as there's the new applications that people are noticing now, but all of these things we need to approach critically. And that's our best, that's going to best situate us through asking of questions, through seeing the historical context, through engaging with the technologies directly, is because they're not always going to be separate. Like the technologies, generative AI technologies included, are going to become more and more embedded into the platforms we're using. I mean, they already are, but even more so into the tools we're using. So it's not going to be like, oh, well, I'm going to do this over here because it's not AI, and I don't like AI, and I'm going to do this because, or sorry, I'm not going to do this because it is AI and I don't like AI and I'll do this. It's going to be it already is much harder to tease.
It's like the number one strategy, isn't it, for every tool that's out there, is where does AI now? Yeah.
Yeah. So everything's getting embedded. And I think the other thing I wanted to underscore that I think media literacy historically has done really well around all of these topics is just call out the fact that it's not, you can't have the good over here and the bad over here, or I don't remember where my good and bad were. These are they're two sides of the same thing. So you can't say like, well, I like these good applications of AI, so I'm going to do these. These are the bad applications. The good ones can be used for harm. The bad ones can be used for good. It's the same technology. And I think we're deluding ourselves if we're thinking that we can avoid all the bad, and we haven't seen this historically ever work, and just have the good. I think it's about learning how the technologies work so we can mitigate the harms as best we can while leveraging the power that they do have. Okay.
One of the themes that I'm also picking up, in addition to we do have these tools and these precedents in terms of structures and ways to engage with generative AI, is that it's embedded in everywhere. It's just embedded in how we live, how we work. So Faith, I want to maybe ask you about a focus area of yours, which is media literacy education for young schools, young kids, even starting in preschool. So if it's so embedded now, and specifically AI, because I know there's some people who are hearing us saying it's okay, we have these tools, but this time it's different. And I'm sure you might want to respond. So Faith, what are your thoughts about when to start engaging with kids, even as young as preschool, with media literacy around AI or anything we're talking about?
Yeah, at least as soon as they're verbal, kind of maybe even before. And the reason for that, in all seriousness, is because whether it's AI or not, to really thrive in the digital world that is our current culture, what we need is for everyone to develop certain kinds of habits and routines of inquiry and effective expression. So it's never about, is this good or bad? It's, is this effective for what I need it to do? And looking at all of that, and I'll give an example, because I don't want to be flip about this, where, you know, for the youngest kids, it really is just about helping them develop the habit of recognizing what media are in their environment, and then attaching that so that their brains kind of automatically attach to that questioning. And one of the concepts, the core concepts of anyone who's media literate, is understanding that all media are constructed. When we explain that to young kids, what we say is, people make media. The people who make media make choices about what to include and exclude. Now, we all know as adults, there are a lot more choices than that, but for little ones, you know, they get like from the hokey pokey thing of inside and outside and stuff. So they can get, they make choices about what they include and exclude. As they get a little older, we can add and that they make choices about how to present what they include. And that what they include and exclude influences how we understand their work, the messages that we take away. So it affects us. We can get pretty young kids to just understand that concept. And if you're going to apply that, what we would say is apply it to everything, including AI. So as kids would get older, they'd already be in this habit of, I understand people make media, and AI isn't some magical voice that comes out of a box. AI also is people created. Whatever system you're using, somebody chose what data it was going to be trained on, right? Somebody chose to design particular kinds of interfaces. So, right, and on and on and on, that they see that. And so they would never use it without coming to some sort of understanding of, do I understand who created this and why, right? What were the choices they were making about what to include and what to exclude, and then how does that affect my interaction with it? So that habit of questioning starts when you're reading aloud in a child in a parent's lap can start that kind of questioning of, what do you notice, or what do you think is going to happen next, and why do you think that, and pointing out that they think it because there's certain evidence there that they're already seeing and identifying those processes. If they've been doing that for 3 or 4 years before they ever hit school, then we're doing our jobs in media literacy education. And that's what we're hoping to do with all these state, you mentioned the legislation before that's happening in increasing numbers of states. That's what we're talking about, integrating this, infusing school curriculum with this culture of inquiry so that teachers and librarians are equipped to help kids become increasingly sophisticated inquirers.
Never too
Thank
soon,
you.
and it's never too late. I think that's important for educators to know, because oftentimes you're like, oh yeah, if we get to them early, I think it's incredibly important. It's a part of their lives. So getting to them in a way that makes sense for their developmental learning stages at that point makes a ton of sense. But also it's never too late. We hear it all the time that students are actually reaching out for some of that insight, but it's the way we interact with them to address these types of insights. If we're addressing it in a way, it's like, we truly want to support, learn about how you're using it. What are your concerns? How do you want to use it versus I want to try and catch how you're doing it. Like if we come into it cynically, they reciprocate that, right? As you're just kind of want to work with youth. And so it really is about providing some, we're talking about like habits, so habits of mind. So there's a skill recognition. How do I use this? How do I get it to work for me? And then there's recognizing the real dispositions and emotions behind the decisions that we make when we use this tech, and how it helps us, what it makes us feel and why we want to use it. And so if we can provide thinking routines for kids, that it's just a part of the way they see something, they pause, they reflect on it, and then they make a decision that's truly reflective of how they want to use it. That goes for generative AI, but that goes for media literacy. That goes for any way that we use media and tech. And I know that there was a question around where can we find some of these types of resources? The organization I work with has a number of turnkey lessons that you can start using already around AI literacy as a specific topic to what we're talking about. But then also we've got a whole news and media literacy one also that's across all grade bands. So the way that we talk about, like, how does certain information make us feel when we access it, it can look different from kindergarten to high school, but the outcomes of like really thinking about what's appropriate for me and how do I vet to make sure that it's the right kind of information for me and how I want to use it, those are things that can scale up age and stage, right? So we'll share those links on the chat so that you have things to kind of reference through.
Yeah, I think I noticed in the chat, we already shared a link to a set of question categories that resides and is downloadable for free on the Project Look Sharp website, which is a media literacy integration project. So that's one place. I also think it's important that we understand this as developing habits and routines. That this isn't, if you're a teacher and you're getting back a lot of cynicism, you need to check your own methods, because cynicism is the absolute opposite of critical thinking, right? Cynicism is easy. Nothing is true. Everybody's trying to fool me. Everything's a gotcha moment. Everything is fake. you don't need to do any kind of thinking. And so we talk about in media literacy, teaching students to investigate, not doubt. This isn't education about doubting media sources. It's about investigating and thinking about media sources.
So I love everything I'm hearing, and I want to like ask 3 or 4 follow-up questions and have you all just probe each other's amazing minds. As I'm skimming through the Q&A, there's maybe one line of questioning that perhaps was implicit that I want to pull out. The general question is, will AI increase this gap or will it close this gap? But I'm going to ask one specific question that was asked by a listener. Educators are experiencing change, fatigue, student attendance decline, overburdened schedules, low pay, shorter tenures. Context. How can we change how we approach and support educators and students in this technical transformation to lead to more equitable education future? So it's a question of like, we buy into the importance, we buy into the priorities, we buy into the rationale. We want equity, a separate question about the actual tool, but then how do we actually do this given the context that we're in? So we only have about 3 minutes. So I'd love if you could just give us some quick pieces and then pass it to the next person.
I'm happy to do a quick
Go
one.
for it. Mhm.
One is a great question, complicated question. One thing that I think is important to note is that you don't need to use AI in order to teach about AI or to teach sort of critical thinking about these topics. And so I think especially as we're thinking about lower resourced areas or people that have other reasons to be concerned about the use of AI technologies, there's a lot of ways you can teach conceptually about how these technologies work and teach a critical approach without actually using AI in your teaching. The second point is, I think this is a great opportunity for educators. It's despite all the fatigue around making the classroom a place to explore together with your students, rather than being like, we are the educators and we have the answers and you students don't have the answers and we're going to give you the answers. What about coming together with your students and exploring together? Like, what is most challenging about this? What have you seen? So I feel like that takes some of the pressure off the educators to be the experts and say, like, even the experts don't know, and I'm not an expert either. Let's explore together. I feel like there's a lot that students are interested in kind of joining together with their educators and exploring this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm now a few lives removed out of the classroom, but I remember just as an educator in the classroom, there's so many things I need to try and achieve in that limited amount of time that I have. And in many ways, there are a lot of processes to get to that point. So if these tools can help circumvent some of the time and even the effectiveness of some of those processes to give you what you really enjoy, connecting with your kids and really understanding and diving deeper into ways that these tools can be helpful. I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, it sounds very easy. Oh, this is going to save you so much time. It also means you got to kind of dive into it a little bit and really see, where does it save me time? Where does it give me real credible support? And so addressing it as, let me test it out. Let me see how this is helpful, and finding what works for you. You can learn from others, obviously, but I think find out what works for you. And that'll really help shape the way that the classroom might be supported using these tools.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, start with where you're at and start.
So I've been told by the powers that be, so we can take about a minute or 2 more. I want to ask you if you can leave the audience with a word of advice, whether it be specifically for educators. I think we've been talking to people in the classroom, direct people who are doing the actual work. If we're thinking about principals, school leaders, district leaders, people who may be able to play around with resources, restructure things to support the direct service providers, anything that you would say? Let's go backwards and start with Faith. You want to go first?
Yeah, focus more on the inquiry stuff than the specific tools and tricks, because those interface kinds of things, by the time the middle schoolers that you have now graduate from high school, all those things will be different, right? So spending lots of time on them now and worrying about that is probably not the best use of district resources. So do that kind of inquiry thing. And also realize media, including AI, is kids' culture. They love talking about it. If you do this and do it in a way that is not about guilt tripping them about parts of their culture, engagement skyrockets. So this is a great way to engage students.
Thank you. Merve?
Oh, hope is not a strategy. As much as we hope they're all going to be okay, we need to set the pathway for that with them. And I think it's also just recognizing that we're no longer in the place where we can just hope also that a single educator focusing on these issues across all of your classrooms is going to develop transferable skills. If we really want to see value in this, we've got to really build a culture in our classrooms where these are common conversations. They're not just a conversation when something hits the fan or there's a problem. It's a conversation of, all right, we're going to use this tool. Remember, what are the 3 things that we're setting as a priority and how we communicate, whatever those norms might be. Those things have been defined already. Again, academic integrity, privacy, appropriate communication. Reinforce them as you're using these tools. And we can dive deep in other places where we have the affordance of time and those educators to really get into the conversations. But if we're not all addressing it, it's not going to be transferable.
Thank you. Newman?
I would add, I would sort of come back to something I said at the beginning, which is around where the power is and challenging the power dynamics in the society we live in, but specifically not giving the AI too much power. And one way to do that is to take some power back as educators, as others, as the general public, and think, how do we want these technologies to be integrated into our lives or not? How do we want these technologies to support our education or not? And social media is different, but I think we've learned a lot from the ways in which social media, which is also owned by companies whose incentives are not the same as, necessarily what's in the public benefit, to learn about how to use these technologies and where they could be really risky and spread the word. And so I think educators participating actively in this is a really, really important part of that. And what we do at the AI Pedagogy Project is combine the creative and the critical. So we always try to incorporate sort of a criticality to the way we're approaching technology. So we're not just celebrating them and say, these are wonderful, this is so exciting. It's like, there's aspects of it that are, and at the same time, we need to be critical. And I would say that would be my advice to others, is try to do those things simultaneously, the critique and sort of the joy that you might have in using some of these. That would be my advice to everybody here.
Thank you so much, Faith, Merve, and Newman, for your just being so generous with your expertise, your experience, and it's clearly your passion in how you talk about this. So thank you all so much for joining in this conversation. And to the listeners, thank you for joining us.